Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me this evening, I have Susie Lewis, who's coming in from Toulouse in France. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
So Susie is the MD at Transform for Value. She's also a podcast host, so she knows what she's doing, which is great. Subject, let's talk transformation. So that's going to be interesting. Susie's an executive coach, but she has spent almost 2 decades at Airbus, holding various senior roles, from digital transformation roles, head of leadership learning, head of diversity and inclusion, so a whole range of things in that industry. And Susie describes her quest is to consistently bridge the gap between digital and humans to create a more inclusive and collaborative cultures in organizations. So what an awesome quest. Before we dive into anything, I'd love to just start our session, I'll start our conversation with a positive focus. It's something that we do in our team, and it starts with, is there something in the last, say, 30 days that you are very grateful for, or a winning achievement, can be work or personal, that you'd like to share? So let's just start there, Susie.
So yeah, well, there's two actually. One's personal and one's professional. So I've been working with a client for a very, very long time on embedding inclusion as part of their strategic business objectives. And we've been working together for a year, and we got to the point the other day where we were in an executive meeting, and somebody started noticing that they were being more inclusive and that the practices were becoming normal, in inverted commas. So that just brought me a whole feeling of warmth. The fact that they were noticing what they were noticing about each other's behavior was just one of my main targets in terms of my quest, but also their main targets in terms of normalizing that developmental practice. So that was one of those, oh yes, moments. And I went mountain climbing on Sunday with friends, and we got a very high mountain very quickly. So that was cool, but also the view was awesome. And just that expansion of nature, and just thinking, yeah, I'm a small drop in a large ocean. And I love that feeling. So there you go. That's both of those.
I love it. In fact, it reminds me of a little Buddha saying of, approach everything you do like the world and universe depends on it, whilst laughing in the face that anything you do will make any difference. And when we go out in nature, we can often have that realization of both our impact and our little drop in the moment of life. My first sort of question is really, what led you into this arena, of dealing with transformation, dealing with people, because we're messy things, right? We're complex beings.
We are, yeah.
What was it that got you into that in the first place?
So I think people, for a start. So like you say, we're sort of perfect imperfections. And my parents are doctors, both of them, and we would always have this discussion around medicine isn't an exact science, and people think differently. And so I've always been interested in people. I've always been interested in what makes people tick. And so that was really what got me interested in people. And then transformation was about, when I first stepped into the workplace, I didn't find it very fair. And I kept noticing this system that was keeping things going. Now, of course, I already had a teaching skill set. I was already a coach, and we had lots of discussions at home around equality and science and things like that. And I just thought, wow, I don't really understand what's happening in the workplace. So I decided to find out what I thought was happening. And then I thought, okay, this is a make or break moment for me. I either try and change it and go on a quest, or I go and do something else. So I decided to change it, but through people and through understanding neuroscientifically, but also operationally, how people react to change and how we can have more positive impact in that environment. I also play in an orchestra, so I've also had that mental process around how I contribute to that and how you play collectively as opposed to individually. And so it just became my mantra, if you like. And I was thinking about my career, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. So it wasn't mapped out then, but it is now. But if I look back, the red thread has always been making an impact and creating communities. And that's just come from curiosity around people. Yeah.
If we think about, creating community, these complex moving parts that they can be like an orchestra, making a mess one moment and making beauty another moment. What have been some of the challenges you've faced when it's been messy, and how have you dealt with some of those situations?
So I think perfectionism is where we should start the discussion. Now, I'm not a perfectionist, but I still struggle to let go. And so I think, wanting everything to be perfect, which I will link back to wanting to know what's going to happen. So we know that the brain is wired for certainty but autonomy at the same time. So, but I want to control what I think is going to happen so that I can prepare for what's going to happen. And I think you need to let go of that. And I've worked a lot with teams on this. I've worked a lot on myself with this in terms of how do you let things emerge? So I think one of my learnings is, and we're seeing a shift now in organizational design and organizational structure, because this controlling, quite rigid framework doesn't work anymore. And it doesn't work anymore because it's not fit for purpose. So if I look at what digital's brought and the complexity of today's world, which is just increasing as technology gets more and more powerful, and the rate of change for that is exponential. So, I really thought about this, Ross, during COVID, and I thought, wow, this is the biggest imposed change experiment the world has ever known, and we're just having to deal with it. So then we adapted quite well, because humans do when they're forced to, when you don't have another choice. But often in organizational change or in change in your own life, you have a choice. And that personal agency that goes with that choice is something that you have to make friends with, I think. So I think the perfectionism that's held in the myths around leadership paradigms today, around strong leaders always have the right answer, strong leaders know it all, strong leaders aren't vulnerable. Clearly I'm exaggerating for emphasis, and there's a big shift going on at the moment. So, but that was my biggest learning, was what you get is not always what you see. And you have to let go of what today we would call learn, unlearn, and relearn, but you have to let go and let things emerge. And that's so easy to say sat on a podcast. But it's not as easy as that when you know that you're up against deadlines and budget deadlines, and you want it to work, and it has to work, and it has to work. So you try and figure it out, and that figuring out, that cognitive figuring it out, doesn't leave the space for you to let things unfold. So they are my two main learnings, I think.
It's interesting, isn't it? When we want something and we over try, we often, shoot it in the wrong way, playing a sport, you try too hard and it won't work, and allowing flow. And it's this interesting thought, isn't it? From where we may have produced a particular action, a behavior, methods, principles that have got a result.
Yeah.
And as long as we're getting close to that result, we're okay with it. And you mentioned, the motivation. Do we need a burning platform? Can't do it anymore, so we have to adapt to, there is a potential another way. I need a burning ambition for that. But what I know here is familiar. It sounds the same. It looks the same. So I'd rather, better the devil we have so many societal sayings that keep us in this lane of comfort. And this, unlearning, relearning, getting into an area that we don't yet understand what will or won't work, requires a set of vulnerability, requires this sort of mindset of being question-led rather than answer-led. And that's real big shift for many people of what has brought an applause in the past. So in that transition of that process, because you rightly said and recognized there is a transition going on from maybe the old guard to the playbook we now need. What are some of the flags? What are some of the oils where we can remove some of the squeaky wheels? What are some of the things that can help facilitate that transition, especially for maybe leaders that can influence that as well? What have you seen working quite well, Susie?
So I think my big mantra is that I've got two. One is, don't let anyone tell you it's impossible, because it's not. And it's not impossible. You can decide how you cut it and divide it into what I call bite-sized chunks so that you can do something with it, and you can make a lot of impact with very small drops in a very large ocean. And I think, Peter Senge, when he talks about leadership is the capacity of a group or a community to shape its future, I wholly believe that. But that's very eco-centric as opposed to egocentric. So I think that's the shift also that's going on. So I think, to come back to your question, small but beautiful works. So taking people with you on, let's take digital language, proofs of concept, that then get to an MVP stage, and that are then iterated upon. But if I put the human dimension behind that design thinking innovation process, it's the empathize bit. Okay, so what are your people's fears? What are their needs? What are their feelings? That's the place to start, and it's often the place that gets left behind because it's a messy conversation, if you like. But once you've got that, you can, and then the definition of the problem statement. You can't boil the ocean dry. So what are you trying to validate, and what assumptions are you trying to check? And I think every step of the journey, you've got to take people with you. To do that, you have to understand human reactions to change and accept that everyone has fears and everyone has hopes, and that we might not have the same fears and hopes, but we need to put them in that space and think, okay, so what do we do with our understanding of the needs, and how do we test it? On the understanding, Ross, that it's a test. So, we hear a lot about, oh, just get curious, just be courageous. I agree with those statements, but you can't do it like that. Not only can you not do it like that, but the system isn't wired, and often the culture isn't wired either, to let you do that or to make it feel normal. That's the whole thing. It doesn't feel normal. So it's getting uncomfortable. It's getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is the second step. So small is beautiful, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and actually always, always, always questioning the status quo, whether it's yours, or whether it's the teams, or whether it's the organizations. What is going on here, and what is happening in the relationships around, even if it's just 10 people involved in a proof of concept, what's happening there, and are we involving the people that we're going to ask to help us scale it? Okay, so whether that's a behavioral change or a product change, they're always linked. So, and I think that understanding, outside of the buzzwords of let's go agile, let's do this, oh, we need to build, measure, learn, all of which is true. But unless you've sat down and defined what that means for you and your organization, or you and your team, or you even as a leader, and how you're going to show up and take people with you, then you can get into a hamster wheel very quickly of trying to do things and figure things out and do things, and you get stuck in the doing, which isn't producing the impact that you wanted. And I think it's knowing when to step out of that, or having somebody that can help you step out of that.
Yeah, because often, we can't observe ourselves very well. We
don't
try
want
to think, we got great self-awareness, we see all of these things, but we only see and hear what our brain's looking for.
Yeah.
An external view from that can see our blind spots. And I think what you described there, this sort of opportunity to, okay, how might I reframe my physical, behavioral, mental responses to uncertainty to feel a degree of comfort that allows me to still function.
Yeah.
And so I'm not in freeze, or I'm not in flight, or my immune system, or the corporate immune system, hasn't come up and gone, don't look like what I'm used to, squash, I don't recognize you. To actually think about, where can we create those pockets? And of course, companies used to do that, used to have these skunk works, used to have these things that were free from the governance, free from certain things. But now I believe, and what I'm seeing is, the whole organization needs to operate more like that.
Yeah.
And the environment where you had a lot of predictability, the predictability timescales shortening. So that as you mentioned, the sort of playbook, the shift is evolving. Now, for some people who look at that and are filled with energy and go, oh, great, I love the word test. I love the word experiment.
Yeah.
And others go, you want to call this an experiment? No, I've got to deliver results.
Yeah.
You know, we can't afford to experiment. How do you respond, and how can you help people maybe reframe or deal with an aversion to experimentation, to testing, to unknown, when all of the measures, all the KPIs, everything that's built up in the system is around predictability, minimizing risk, not taking risk? And if we don't get this right, Susie, we're out. So we've got to get it right. We can't afford not to. So how do you deal with that?
So I think there's lots of different ways of dealing with it. The first thing is I welcome that, because I think multiple perspectives and knowing how to manage and hold multiple perspectives is, I was going to say, a leadership skill. If I define leaders as our capacity to shape the future, then it's a leadership skill for everybody to be able to hold different perspectives. Because I thank those people, because people are getting excited and go, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that. Often they don't see things in the same way that people are going, oh no, that will never work, don't see opportunities. So I think welcoming that and actually naming it and putting it in the space. I'm a big believer in deep democracy and getting all voices heard, because I think that, you know, innovation happens on the edge of systems because of the way systems work. And so hearing those voices, including the silent voices, is where the group wisdom lies. And I think, so that'd be my first point, to welcome that other perspective. And then to try and help us reframe the situation, because I think, you know, I understand that way of thinking, but it only got us so far. So if we never try anything different, then, you know, we might not get results anyway, because those results won't be relevant if we don't move fast enough. So I think that that's the other side of it, is reassuring them that what they feel is normal, and that it's good to have different perspectives, and that we need to work together to define how we do that. I mean, if I look at Dave Snowden's, you know, Cynefin model, that's what he's talking about in the ordered world and the unordered world, and that we mainly spend time in complicated systems, in complicated sort of lenses, but today's system is complex in his language. And so how do you let things emerge? So I would be working with those people to find a compromise between keeping our sort of good practice that we have and building on it, and letting things emerge. And what would that look like? And I'm back to the design thinking discussion of, what are your needs, what are my needs, and how can we create a situation where we can have a bit of both, but move the collective goal forward? Now, you never get 100% unanimity, we know that. And, you know, humans are what humans are. So if people don't want to, they don't want to. But I think if you address underlying fears, and you don't have to say, oh, you're scared, tell me what you're scared of, but, you know, having a conversation that allows you to air a little bit of why they're feeling reticent, or why you're feeling massively excited and you haven't seen the rest of it, because there's always those two sides of it, and they're equally useful, is the way forward. And I think that's the only way you get a model that works for the transition phase.
And ultimately, we have to boil down to decisions,
Yep.
to say no to things,
Yep.
and say yes to things,
Yep.
and give ourselves permission to make a new decision the following day when we have new data or new information, or new shift. And I guess this is the next challenge for us in society, where I was brought up of certain skills, certain attributes being celebrated. Grit. Have grit. You've got to stick with stuff. You know, as a young kid, I remember my parents saying, no, you got to go through that pain from something where, oh, I was excited about, oh, it's a bit harder than I thought, want to run away, to no, work on it a bit, and you'll get a new level of capability and competency. Yet at the same time, grit can be a shadow side. We can stay at something too long. And I guess this is like with all knowledge, is when do you apply it, the wisdom to choose where grit is used. I'm interested a little bit just to dive into around the leaders in particular, and we're all leaders, not necessarily by a title, but by a mindset of what are we leading toward? You know, what kind of future self version that's relative to us, that is progress. So we measure against back, we inspire against forward. And I understand you went on the Dare to Lead training
Yes.
program.
Yes.
And, you know, Bernie Brown and all of that kind of thing. What was some of the best things about that? Because even the semantics, even the language of dare to lead, what were some of the insights? What were some of the best things from that, Susie?
So I think it was massively exciting. And I like the title Dare to Lead, but I quite like being challenged on, you know, what I would dare to do and what I wouldn't dare to do. But I think the most challenging thing for me was daring to go down 2 or 3 levels into what I feel about daring to lead. And, you know, the things that people quote Brené Brown on quite often, like choose courage over comfort, vulnerability is a strength, all of which is true. But when you have to go there and understand what's going on, and you have to do your own work before you can take it back into organizations, I think that was very powerful in terms of what it actually means for your leadership and what it actually means for the way you show up. So that was the first thing. The second thing I really took away from that work was what I read in her books and then went into when I was trained, is human reactions to shame. Because so much of our sort of fight or flight reactions, if I use the leadership circle language from Bob Anderson, it's the reactive tendencies. So it's where you go when you're stressed or tired or overworked or under pressure, which happens a lot to everybody in organizations. So you're then into your reactive tendencies, which are essentially a reaction to fear or shame. So that was very insightful for me, Brené Brown's work on that. And, you know, I love using it to try and operationalize with what I've learned. Said, oh, look at this, it could be like this, it could be like that. Because so for me, what is missing in a lot of organizations is the translation of concepts into operational tactics or operational reality, and having people who can accompany people on a day-to-day basis to challenge that type of thing. And so therefore the toolkit around human reactions to shame and what you do with that when you're having a conversation with someone. So that was very insightful for me. And I created quite a lot of my approaches by integrating things that I'd learned from concepts like that, and then added into what I'd already learned from operationally deploying things. So yeah, I'm a bit of a magpie like that. When I find out new things, like, oh, how can I translate that into an operational approach?
Yeah, how can I translate it? And I think you picked up on a couple of bits that I'd love to just jam on with you in terms of our responses and our reactions to different stimulus.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I'm doing a 14-week course on the neuroscience of change.
Oh, cool.
And it's going into where we think, and many, oh, neuroscience, oh, that's the brain, that's the mind. And what we're learning at the moment is all about semantic coaching, all about the embodied brain, of the amount of neurons in our fascia around our different systems of our introspection, our proception, our different nervous systems of our sympathetic, parasympathetic, and how you mentioned, our reaction to shame, and our thinking part, our conceptual part, to actually what are the physical reactions that are going on, the physicalities of feeling a movement, feeling a warmth, feeling a tightness, feeling all of these things that we've not wanted to really approach in business. Maybe that's a therapy thing, as opposed to, no, change we're going through in work requires an awareness and understanding of what is deep rooted in someone's built-in brain, in their whole body, of their experiences they've lived, when we try to come along and say, hey, you got this new bit of technology, or use this, and something may have happened that they can't control that embodied reaction to, let alone a conceptual reaction. And so even like words, the word dare can be motivating or can be collapsing for people. And I think when we explore that, when we have a level of radical sort of candor to expose it, opportunities are immense, aren't they?
They're endless, and it's, I mean, so it's a clear example of what we don't have vocabulary for, particularly in business. And a lot of the work that I learned from Brené Brown and that I do with organizations and leaders is around emotional literacy, I call it, but also this embodied, to be embodied, embodied and literate. Okay, body is your brain, super. I was
I
struggling
would
with how
recommend
to
it.
formulate that.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it. That embodied emotional sense of listening to those different systems.
Yeah.
So Manda Blake is running part of the course along with a number of others. And it's an amazing book. So for those who are just on the audio, it's called Your Body is Your Brain. Leverage your somatic intelligence to find purpose, build resilience, deepen relationships, and lead more powerfully.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're talking about at the moment, Susie.
It is, and it's a great lever for creating inclusive environments where lived experiences and sharing lived experiences is so powerful. But somatics, just to come back to that, so, you know, this whole idea of, we're also back to the stories you tell yourself. So I always used to tell myself, oh, I'm not good at expressing emotions. Oh, I don't know how to do that. But actually, now I've trained on it and I use it in coaching. I am actually quite good at that. And that was like a big revelation. I was like, oh, actually, and it feels very different. So now I'm, you know, and I encourage people to say, you know, how do you feel as a check-in to a meeting, or, you know, tell me how you're feeling. You're not allowed to use the word good or bad. You know, give me a feeling, but, you know, and it's a practice, but it's so powerful. The body as a brain is so incredibly powerful. So I think, as you do with any new habit, the first thing is noticing what you notice. And once you've got into that sort of curious observation bit, you can start looking at triggers and what you do with those triggers and how you show up. Because I think organizations should be seen as systems. They are living, evolving systems. And the currency of those systems for me is relationships. And, you know, it's not just 2 days on an emotional intelligence course that will give you, not that it's not useful, that's not my point at all. But unless you practice it and you know, for example, you practice doing something different, you practice naming an emotion, you practice, oh, in that meeting, I felt really close and it felt really tight on my chest. You know, you don't have to share that, but it's really interesting to just notice what you notice.
Yeah, I think that powerful sense of using the mind that maybe has been the realm of business, that we conceptualize, we theory, a lot of the learning and training is around understanding concept and practical implementation of that. Yeah. But the emerging of new opportunities of just noticing how somebody physically responds and reacts during transformation. Yeah. So is it about, where is the future or past for somebody? Yeah. Knowing that, and for some cultures, the future is behind you. Yes. And it's because you can't see it. Mm. And so therefore it's behind you. And for others, no, the future's in front of you, and you work in that way. And so even when you're making movements, making gestures, when you're of yourself, okay, so let's, you know, step into that. We might just unknowingly think we're being inclusive of, okay, what we need to do, Susie, is we need to embrace this, and our hands will move in a certain way with these things. And for others, they'll be going, oh God, that's going into dark places, into past, into somewhere I don't like, whatever it may be. So I think that opportunity for these, you know, crafting intentional systems that are hyper personalized is an interesting one. So what are sort of the opportunities we've got in the, you know, way we can recraft those systems to be fit for the purpose that we need for work in the environment at the moment? What's your sort of insights there?
So, I mean, I think I'm going to go back to the orchestra because it's about listening. And it's about listening intently to what's being said, but also to what isn't being said. And I call that listening to the system, because I've learned so much from working with multicultural, multinational teams. Like you say, you know, everybody has their own individual expression. And then there's the cultural layer, the national culture, and then there's the workplace culture layer. So, you know, you can, and that's why I've had some of the best feedback on what I thought was motivational or what I thought was exciting and inspiring people. And actually it was referring to something that they didn't find inspiring because the culture was different. So I think listening to what your people have to say, listening to what they don't say, and observing what's going on in your meetings, who's speaking, how they're feeling, what the energy level is. So if I take it to a team level, it would be that. If I take it to an organizational design level, I would be looking at what type of governance structures and mindset do we need to, and what type of operating model to allow us to work across systems, because internal ecosystems, external ecosystems, how do we do that? So what does the governance need to look like? Is it a matrix organization? Is it more of a sort of centralized teams of teams organization? Is it a decentralized power structure? And then if it is, do we have collective objectives? Do we have, so all theyese things that today we're taking apart from the older paradigms and organizational design and putting into new, and one size doesn't fit all there. So I think that piece of work is hugely, hugely important. And yes, external consultants can help, but talking to your people and understanding the lived experience of today's system and what they're struggling with for what's being imposed by tomorrow's system, which is the digital interconnection of everything, whether we like it or not, would be a big piece of work for me. And coming down from that is therefore the relationships in that system. What does that mean? If I have to move from ownership to partnership, which is often the case, whether it's platform business models or communication and organization, what does that mean, and how can I enable that? Because I'm going to hit my own barriers there as a leader if I think that having information makes me powerful and things like that. So I think there's those 2 or 3 areas where I would start looking, because everything else comes from that. Because I think we don't do systems thinking enough. So often when I discuss transformation strategy, it's not holistically, it's, oh, well, this is what we're doing in HR and this is what we want to do in procurement. But if I take a systems view and I try and connect the dots, what happens there? And that often we don't take time to do that because we're too busy delivering, which I also understand. But it's that balance between what I call being, so having a space, creating conditions for things to emerge, and doing, which you have to do, of course. But it has to be at a holistic level. And when I work a lot with inclusion and diversity, which for me is a holistic fundamental building block for any ecosystem to work. So, you need empathy, you need psychological safety, you need co-responsibility, you need a collective vision, but you also need the processes, systems, and relationships that will allow that to flourish as a whole. So we're back to, how do I take this Lego factory and take bits out and then put it back together differently? And I don't think we spend enough time doing that. And you can do it in a design sprint of 5 days, but you won't look at the whole system. But that type of discussion needs to go on constantly, and you can't tick a box, so we've done the strategy. It's going to evolve, because and it's just a whole different lens, which I think is why equipping ourselves and our teams to manage different perspectives is really important.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The evolution of work,
yeah,
through the ages. And when we look at history of imagination economies, and then we're looking at consistency, efficiency, productivity, and a scale, to maybe now a re-emergence of the creativity and imagination, where we were rewarding, as you said, knowledge and answers. That was power. So now it's questions and involvement. And I think there is still a huge challenge around even someone's themselves including all parts of them. So we often think about inclusion of culture, age, race, all of those things. But do I include all the elements of me even? And I think if we start to understand and give a forum for that we can adapt to different environments. How I communicate with my parents or my grandchildren are different. How I communicate anywhere else, because I'm aware of context. I'm aware of what's appropriate or not when I'm with the girls or with the boys or whatever it may be. We have these societal thoughts of, we want to fit in. I want to connect. I want to know where I am, and who's my tribe. And I'm interested in a thought of yours around this, because with consistency, with alignment, that we all want to, have clarity of those things. We've often talked about, we've got to get cultural fit. We've got to do those things. And I've often thought and talked, and particularly within a lot of the businesses I've developed, is no, I want cultural add. I want it to be different. I want it to be messy and knowingly messy, but I want to have some principles that make sure the friction is positive friction, not friction that reaches for sharp objects in dark rooms.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I'm just interested that, the systems and principles take time, are challenging, especially if there is existing things
Yeah.
that we've put loads of protection around them.
Yeah. My baby. That's my baby.
Yeah,
My project.
of just the reward of, well, it got us here. It's Marshall Goldsmith. What got us here won't get us there situation. But that doesn't help practically. And how do I deal with that? So has there been some examples that you can share either from Airbus or the clients that you've been working with, where there's been some things that have gone, that's how they shifted? You mentioned at the very start, you'd worked with this client, their behaviors triggered, and they noticed in themselves they were being more inclusive in their thinking or language. Can you just give us a few more behind the scenes looks at what has been going on that has manifested in that result?
So I think, we're back to Brené Brown she gives the two priorities of fitting in or belonging. And, fitting in is pretending to be somebody you don't feel you are, to fit in, because we all have a need to belong and to be connected and to be trusted. That inclusion, as you say, is around difference, but I like to start with what makes us the same, because that's what we're aiming for. And I think the behavioral shifts have come from dialogue. So if I look at what's worked, it's dialogue or scaling that different environment. So if I look at, for example, in Airbus, we looked at federating women's networks, and we brought together 900 people. Then we looked at making them inclusive, and one big inclusive network, and linking it to the strategic business objectives. And 8 or 9 years later, they're 13,000 members or something like that. And we've just brought together like-minded people, like-minded in the fact that they want to create change and create a different environment in lots of different ways. And that has been so powerful because there is permission in that activity for people to be themselves. So belong as opposed to fit in. Therefore, you unlock potential. Therefore, because to come back to reactions to fear and shame, people don't feel as much fear or shame about how they show up or their ideas. So therefore, you get creativity. And therefore, people get curious and notice what they notice about people's behavior, because it's okay to say that. So that is typically something that I've seen, and something that I've seen work in terms of scaling momentum. And everyone says, oh yeah, but it's bottom up, it's ground roots. Yes, it is, but it doesn't mean that at the top they don't see it and they don't support it. So I think that's worked, and working with the top at the same time as creating these powerful learning communities has worked very well. And to come back to your question of what exactly works is, I see your values, I see what we're putting in place. What does that mean for the behavior we need to see or you want to see? And I think it's always about declining and bringing, if I come back to my lean and agile days of the value flow, which is so important, that value stream mapping of what will it look like, how long will it take, and what will I see? That's really important, particularly in behavioral change of, okay, so if your value is collaboration or team player, what behaviors are we expecting to see at the top? And therefore, people will be expecting to look up and see you role model that. So what would it look like? How do we know when we've got it? How do we know when we don't have it? And I think just taking things down to an operational understanding is really how you make that change, whether it's in a small community, whether it's scaling communities, whether it's in organizational design. So here's an organizational design. Let's get a few more people in who are like as different from me as possible and see what they think of that. And yes, it takes longer, but that's how I've seen things work. And my quest on opening up organizations starts with, the transformation of an organization, the maturity of an organization will never transcend the maturity of its leaders. So I think you need to meet people and the organization where it's at on a maturity scale. And, even though you want them to be there, they might be there. So if you try and just pull them there, it's not going to work for the reasons we've already discussed around the way humans react to having things imposed on them, unless it's like COVID and you don't have a choice. So I think they're the two main things. is make it operational. So to go back to that sort of buzz language, the what's in it for me, it's so important. But the what's in it for me in terms of what I might be fearing as well as what I would like to see. And then taking people with you and working with the top at the same time, but also at the same level of definition, you know. Then it's not just posters on a wall, and it's not just words on a slide. It's also, this is how I'm showing up. And, you know, they have to be ready to be called out if they're not showing up like that.
It's interesting, isn't it? And then I love this idea of so many things can be quite simple when we think about them. You know, if humans, okay, so we need to connect, what's in it for them. And the use of words and the language of a lot of these things is we haven't been equipped with the sort of language that we now need to layer into these old principles that are now functioning in a new playground. So I love that idea of, well, what does coloured in done look like? You know, what's that behavior? Because we have this challenge in business of what are we looking at, the outputs or the outcomes? Are we looking at the behavior or the result? And what's the answer always, if you go further up, is both. And so we need to have these little bits of, okay, what's in it for me? Well, how will you feel within that? What will your sense be like? Could you embody that reality of when you, okay, so you're seeking security. We've understood that this could be a route to that security, but you need to go through something before that. Embody what security feels like. And I think the age of lean, of management, of structure, I think we now have an age of coaching, an age of where we are able to listen more, that we can be more hyper personalized, both through people and technology to enable that. Whereas before it would be very hierarchical, and at best fill your boots on this LMS system of some learning to, okay, Susie, so what's your pathway? What's your journey? Where are you struggling? That would be only available to a few. I think technology and opportunity can allow both self-discovery and support from others to help us through those moments.
I think it's democratization of access to those skills. You know, if I had to put my question in different words, it would be that. And I feel quite strongly about that from a fairness point of view, but also from a well-being point of view. You know, people should have access to those skills so that they can create the conditions for their peers or their team members to, you know, work in an environment that helps them to thrive. I know that sounds fluffy, but it's far from fluffy when you watch it happen.
No, you know, we are both curators and experiencers of the environment. You know, we are part and we are subject. So I'd like to just finish on an area really around when we're going through transformations, system of each of these bits, that we do have the beautiful moments that we embrace. And I loved how you want to embrace all of these things, embrace both fear and excitement of each of those. What are some of the, and I've got two bits. So what are some of the practical ways do you have, even in your own life? Do you do things? Do you have mantras? Do you have movements? Do you have a couple of ways that you've learned along the way to help you when, okay, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. Let me pull these tools out to help me become more comfortable in this because I'm starting to notice it. What are some of those? And then I've got one more thing before we finish up, Susie.
So I do have mantras. I've mentioned a couple of them. So don't let them tell you it's impossible when it's not. I don't believe anything's impossible. So that's, and never look back unless it's to learn something from what you've done. So I think, you know, the whole, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that, I should have done this, I should have. So, you know, taking like should have and what if out of my vocabulary intentionally really helped me not get stuck in that over-critical self-analyzing thing. I also think it took me a long time to actually step into a space where I would reach out for help. And I was like, oh, no, I don't need help. I can do everything. And I think reaching out for help can feel very empowering, and I do it a lot now. So to come back to your question, when I'm struggling with whatever, I have certain go-to people, which is my tribe. I had them in the organization, I have them now, I'm an independent worker. And I go to them and I say, look, I'm struggling with this, or I've had this feedback, what do you think? Or I'm stuck in this idea, tell me. And they will tell me whether I like the answer or not, which is why I go to them, what they think. And so that is incredibly helpful for pivoting your own thinking. Even if you already think you have a growth mindset, everyone has blind spots, as we've already said, and everyone has those, what I call oh shit moments, where you just can't get yourself out of your own head. And you know that you're struggling, and you know that if you don't do something, you're going to really struggle down to the bottom of Otto Scharmer's you, which can be quite a dark place. And I think, we don't talk enough about mental health. And I think we don't reach out enough on these subjects. So my invitation to all the listeners would be to do that. And from having done that, yes, it's hard, and yes, it feels uncomfortable. And I just think it sometimes still feels hard, but I do it because it's empowering and it's building capacity for the future. So that's, somebody called me a relentless optimist the other day, and yes, I am.
Yeah.
And I like to be that.
Well, they live
that's
longer
how I like to be.
and live happier.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we want to be?
Yeah, but sometimes I need people to pick me up on it and say,
pick you up.
Have you looked at everything here? And it's like, yeah, maybe not.
So the two bits, I'm sure you've seen it, but the impossible just with an apostrophe shifts. But I'm possible. Yeah. And I remember Peter Diamandis, somebody I've spent a fair bit of time with, talking about, impossible. Well, it might be for you, but it isn't impossible, whatever it might be. And it might be at the moment, but what do you need to put in place? Who do you need to surround yourself with to achieve that? And the other one, I love this 180 flip of a sense of society where asking for help was a sense of weakness and, Peter needs help, to a sign of strength. Asking for help is a huge sign of strength. I want to just share a super quick personal story. And my father reached out on our family WhatsApp last night. He put a little video post on, and he actually also shared it on Facebook. He's going through cancer at the moment. He's got stage 4 lung cancer, was not given very long, and has transformed his entire life. So you from Manchester, you'll appreciate he's a northern bloke, man's man. Mental health. My wife and I, we practice yoga, meditation, all of hocus pocus. To now, this video said, I've got my scan tomorrow. I'm really struggling. I'm going to be doing a chant tonight at 10 o'clock. I'd like you to join me in doing it. This is what I'm saying. And he reached out to the family to do that. And that's a massive shift of both the behavior, but also talking about it and asking for help. And I went, how strong? Rather than no, it's stiff upper lip, got to be strong. We don't do that. I'll deal with it type situation. So what you just described as a lived experience for me of that shift of what the definition of asking for help means in the world. Leaders have the answers. No, leaders ask for help the most. And they're brave enough to do that is wonderful. And what a great opportunity. And I said, thank you for the gift of allowing us to know how we can help. And often we don't know, and we can see somebody we love in a role, a colleague. And so asking for that help is a gift, not a burden.
Absolutely. And I'll never forget one of my colleagues who gave me the feedback of, I think you don't realize, or you forgot, Susie, how much people like to be asked for help. And her words stay with me. And it was like almost 10 years ago. And it's just like, this isn't about me.
Physical shivers.
And this isn't about me. This is about empowering myself. But it's about also empowering others. And I love that lens because I like to have an impact. So that makes me go further than I would normally if it was just about me. So it's
a dual service of dual elevation. The ability to serve and be served is mutually beneficial. So my last question, and I ask it for everyone, Susie, and it's around curiosity and daring and all of those kind of things. And can't mention climbing up mountains or those things. So the question is, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
Oh, the last time I did something for the first time. So I try and do lots of things for the first time, quite often. But my big, so what's coming to mind when you ask me that question is stepping out of the organization I'd been in for 20 years and setting up my own business. Wow. I mean, it was such a massive first time experience. And I didn't overthink it, gladly. But looking back, it's just, and that's given me so many first time experiences almost every month. Okay, I've documented them because I quite like to do that journaling. And it's just every month I felt like I was having a first time experience. But even now, even once you're established, it's like, oh, now I'm scaling. Oh, now I'm doing this. Oh, now I'm doing that. So I think I have to go back almost 4 years and say that's the last time I really had that feeling of treading water. You know, you're just looking around thinking, wow, whoa, I'm moving and I'm doing something, but it feels massively new and quite scary, but quite exciting. So that's the one that comes to mind.
And it's building that muscle that leads us to the point you made at the beginning of being comfortable in the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And whilst we crave certainty and novelty in our paradox way we've been wired, is to be able to, you know, look at first whether they're true first, or it's the same thing, but we've got new eyes. New eyes that we're looking at in each of these things, that we can approach life. And for me, a life that brings a smile when we get up and a smile when we go to bed, that we've served, we've learnt, and we've earned in the blend of life, I think it's a wonderful place. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure's been all mine. I've loved hanging out with you, learning and sharing some of your amazing experience. And, you know, we can have 1 year experience repeated 20 times, or you can really listen. We can learn, we can evaluate, we can journal and decide, what do we want to leave behind and what do we want to take forward tomorrow. So a deep gratitude and thank you, Susie.
Likewise, it was great. Thank you very much.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalised report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organisations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.